And hello, everyone. I hope everyone is having a great day. We have so much to cover. Definitely encourage your participation, your feedback, your guidance. We're going to try to make this as interactive as possible and engaging as possible. And so I would love to learn from you as much as I'm providing you with some new information. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint deck. I may go in and out, and let's kind of take it from there. Wonderful. So this is called Growing, Growing, Grown: How to Expand and Cultivate Your Program's Growth. So, as I was previously introduced, I'm China Jude. I would like to be called Dr. J, but I was told that's not fair because there's only one Dr. J, but I am the Organizational Inclusion Strategist here for USA Volleyball. So, what does an organizational inclusion strategist do? Now, of course, I'm not going to read everything, but I'll just kind of go through the overview. We assess the organization's infrastructure. We conduct a lot of market research and competitor analysis, looking at the effectiveness of a lot of our processes. We try to put strategies together to solve problems. We even look at other organizations to see how it can work for our organization and create some goals based upon the information that we find. And of course, we want to make sure that everyone has a voice and hopefully with the experience of having that sense of belonging. So you're wondering, like, well, where did she come from and who is she and what is she about? Well, I do have my doctorate in education. I am a former Division I volleyball player, volleyball coach, as well as I've supervised volleyball on an intercollegiate level. And I did a little officiating in high school. I've had the pleasure to serve as a director of athletics at 3 separate institutions and had the pleasure to work for an NFL team for 3 seasons, the Denver Broncos, which I was the inaugural vice president of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Great experience working in the NFL space, learned a lot, and bringing a lot of those experiences to United States Volleyball Association. So, also have a lot of military background too. Not only I've been in the military, but I am a daughter, a sister, and a mom of a veteran and served in a number of leadership roles in the non-for-profit space. So I do conduct other presentations. So if this presentation really interests you to learn a little bit more, I do conduct presentations all over the country for corporations, higher education institutions, other organizations. So feel free to reach out if you want to learn a little bit more about some other things that I do or have done. So, as Lauren mentioned, we're going to do a lot. We have polling, we're showing video, we're going to talk about some generational differences, how they learn, how they socialize. We're going to lean into 3 different strategies on how we can grow our organizations, our clubs, our teams. Be mindful. You may say, hey, we're already doing some of that, and that's great. At least it gives you the opportunity to explore how to lean into it a lot more, and as always, we do want your participation. So let's go into the first question. Why are you here? Now, we're going to put some polling questions up. I only want you to answer the very first. You may see question 2, but only answer the very first question. Why are you in this session? Is it because you're curious, or you want to grow, or you want to learn a new strategy? Or you're bored and you're like, I have some time, so let's just go ahead and lean into this, or something else. So we would love to hear from you. We'll give about 15 seconds and then we can go and see if we can get some results.
Yeah, so looks like we're about evenly split between I had some time, so I thought I'd listen. I want to grow the number of participants on my team and organization, and I hope to learn a new strategy.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we're going to go ahead and get to the next one. So Data. As an organizational inclusion strategist, I rely on data. It is great to have some anecdotal experiences and some feel, but having data and utilizing analytics to our advantage can really help us in so many different ways. And these are some points that I wanted to make sure that everyone understand. If you don't have a data-driven decision-making process, whether you are identifying talent or evaluating players or scouting or predicting the future, take those things into consideration. And we'll talk a little bit about what that could look like on a very basic level. We want to make sure that you're utilizing all of your tools to grow your team or your organization. But the goal is any type of supporting documentation or strategies is going to really minimize the bias and how you're making these particular decisions. So it got me thinking about one of my favorite movies. If you don't know this movie, please get it. Moneyball. I love this movie. It is about baseball, and it's about a manager by the name of Billy Beane. Was the general manager for the Oakland A's, and he adopted a revolutionary approach to building a competitive baseball team on a very limited budget. Of course, he was nowhere near the levels of the New York Yankees or the Dodgers, but he collaborated with this Yale graduate in utilizing something called sabermetrics or sabermetrics, and and his goal was to focus on these undervalued players, um, to evaluate how they can leverage this information on getting on base. So this was about on base percentage rather than the traditional metrics. When you take into consideration when we're evaluating players, a lot of times it's based upon either feel, what we see with our eyes, we have a relationship with them, maybe we have coached them in the past, so we know about their family. It's a lot of those anecdotal type of experiences. But in the case of Moneyball, he specifically focused on base percentage. Well, that strategy led to, despite the resistance of his strategy, but that strategy did lead to an American League record with 20 consecutive wins in 2002. And so this film explores innovation and the challenges that he had to face to break through the status quo. Well, even for us, for USAV, there is a problem. Anytime that we focus on any type of strategy, we always identify the problem. And many times it's not directly in our face. So since my September 6th arrival, I've heard problems of we need to increase our boys' population. We're now dealing with transgender policy issues on the collegiate level. There's concerns about harassment during our events. We need to create a pipeline of officials. Club prices are increasing as parents are really leaning into preparing their youth for graduation, college level, and of course, when we're dealing with safe sport issues, there's issues of sexual misconduct allegations. There are a multitude of problems, but ultimately, we're trying to have that pathway, that pipeline to the podium. We want that gold medal. So we have to always ask ourselves in our organization, what is the true problem? And then once we see the bigger picture of the particular problem, that can help us strategize. So let's open up. I'm a bit curious. There's no poll to this. This is a general open question. Lauren, are we capable of hearing someone to share it through the chat line or so on? Does anyone can share what is the general profile of your athletes? The general profile. I understand that there may be a range, whether it's their personality traits, social skills, learning styles, but is there a general profile of what your athletes look like, sound like, talk like, live like that they would like to share?
I would love to encourage you all to go ahead and drop that into the webinar Q&A. That's a great way for China to be able to see your responses kind of in real time here. So it looks like we have maybe some high school folks who are having their girls play in the club in high school space. There's a little bit there of profile of athletes, very generally speaking.
Mhm.
I have middle to upper class.
Okay.
Majority of my club are African American, Hispanic, middle and high schoolers.
Very good.
Mainly newer players starting at middle school, very basic skill level. High school girls, juniors, and sophomores, mix of all backgrounds and income levels.
And we'll take one more.
8th grade, middle class, 1 to 2 seasons of rec, no more than 1 year of club.
Love it. And this is how analytics and data can help to understand the profile of your particular program. The reason why that is important, because if we're exploring how to recruit more and a parent, a sponsor, a community member asks, well, what type of youth you're pursuing? Leaning into data can help be a little bit more specific versus just the generality of your club's profile or your organization's profile. So I want to lean a little bit more about we've already passed an understanding what our profile is, but how do we engage them? How do we make sure that they're engaged and they're a part? The best way of understanding it is to know how they operate. And how they operate is based upon generations. Now, here we are, we're in different types of generations. And I know back in the day, I would hear a lot of, well, when I was your age, this is what we used to do. And as a kid, I would say, well, we don't do that anymore. That's what you did. Um, so I show the different generations from builders all the way to Gen Alpha, where we're at currently, and focusing on from slang to their social markers, the cars they drive, the toys that they play. And it's pretty interesting to see because I'm always looking at myself in it to say, this is where I'm at. So I'm Generation X. And so I look inside of Generation X and said, yes, to this very day, I still don't know how to work that Rubik's Cube. I still never got all of I can get one side, but I can't get all of them. And it gives me a much better appreciation as I'm working with these other generations on how they speak, what is important to them, how they lean into a lot of different issues. So if you don't have the opportunity to connect with these various generations and learn how they move, communicate, and receive information, this is a great opportunity to explore. But we're going to go a little bit deeper into these generations, and we're only going to focus right now on Generation Y, Z, and Alpha. Because when we're working with the high school and younger demographic, it is important to know how they communicate and how they are engaged. And so, taking into consideration their learning expectations, all three of these particular generations really focus on how they learn through technology. From Generation Y, they were very technological driven. Then it moved to Generation Z. They wanted more digital approaches. a lot of real world application. And then to our existing, our current generation, they're focusing a lot on AI, virtual reality. Everything is on the computer. Unfortunately, a lot of our physical education and physical programs in schools are eliminating to now more of technology. So we have to keep those things in mind when we want to recruit, when we want to engage people. How do we introduce this beautiful sport that we're all a part of and we're invested in? How do we get them to stay engaged based upon how they think, not how we think? And taking those things into consideration, we really should think about the strategy of leveraging technology. How do we leverage technology to not only introduce the sport, but for them to learn about the sport in so many different ways, whether it's through gaming, the first person experience, whether it's those glasses or goggles or what's on the head with the camera, so people can see that firsthand experience. Player analysis. I remember when I learned how to play golf and I was on a simulator and I was learning how good or bad my swing was when I was in golf. I wish I had that in volleyball. But how do you leverage technology to teach people on how to learn volleyball? Gamification is a very big thing now in the industry. How do we analyze the sport in a lot of different ways utilizing technology? And one of the most simplest thing is the athlete social media takeover. I used to, as I mentioned before, I was a college athletic director, and we would give our social media to the athletes and say, you take over it now. Instead of our staff always writing the stories of doing the video, we're going to give you a couple hours to take over our social media. Of course, you have to watch them to make sure it's all appropriate content, but they are very creative, whether they're various TikTok videos or the day in the life, anything to keep them engaged, to learn more about the sport and to show how fun the sport is from their particular perspective. So that leads me to a poll question, which is poll number 2. Knowing what we've talked about, what are some of the technological strategies that you have used to grow or enhance your team or your organization? So the poll will pop back up again. Only go to number 2, whether it's virtual profiles, that's an option, player analysis, social media, first person experience, or virtual gaming. If your options aren't there, that's okay. I should have put an other there if I haven't already done that. But what are some of those strategies that, oh, there it is, an other. What are some of the strategies that you're currently using?
Looks like the winners right now are most of our folks are saying using social media hype or athlete takeovers, first person experiences, and player analysis.
That's great. The more that you lean into it, it really does make a significant difference. Let's be mindful for those who are pursuing the collegiate space in this particular sport. If you're not familiar with name, image, and likeness, NIL, that is growing substantially. And once these athletes are leaning into that social media presence, for the most part, it could be a great return on investment for companies, organizations, corporations who may see that social media presence and may put a little financial investment in them. So, any opportunity for them to lean into social media, please make sure that you're mindful of what that looks like. LinkedIn is professional based. TikTok is more teenager. Facebook are the 30s, 40s, and 50-year-olds. Know the demographics of all of the different types of social media platforms so you can determine what is best for you. If you're talking to parents, that's one platform versus if you're talking to athletes or prospective athletes, that's a may potentially be another platform. There's a lot of changes in the space, in the social media space. So make sure that you conduct your research accordingly. So moving forward, social interaction. So looking at the three different generations, there are some socially conscious individuals within these particular generations. They're diverse, they're purpose driven, they have a global mindset on the millennials. When it moves over to Generation Z, they're more aware of what is happening in the world. Diversity, equity, inclusion is a priority to them. Digital communication is good. That's what they prefer, but they are okay with the face to face also. And also, that generation is always leaning into taking pictures of the food that they're eating or the vacation that they're going. They wanna show themselves a heck of a lot more during the Generation Z time. But when we get to the Generation Alpha, it does lean into valuing diversity, equity, inclusion, and connecting with people. And even when they get older and seeking out, employers, they're very intentional to work for an employer who wants to invest in corporate social responsibility initiatives and social justice initiatives. Generation Alpha is the most diverse yet. When it gets to the next generation, which is Generation Beta, it is going to be very, very diverse. They're going to focus and lean more on social justice, be more socially conscious of how the world is surrounding them. So thinking like the young people is going to be very helpful as you're moving forward. And taking that into consideration, there's diversity in sports. And looking at the National Federation of High School Associations, I research all of the sports in these particular in the high schools, and these are the girls' sports. And on that second column where it says high participation in terms of ethnicity, you will see where majority of those particular girls are going for each of the sports. I highlighted volleyball, that majority in high school association. There are white females. However, there is a growing category of Hispanic girls who are interested in volleyball. Low and moderate are Blacks and Asian Americans. So I'm only pointing these particular sports out because at times when I told you that there was a problem, what was the problem? Many times we're focusing on, hey, we're competitive with AAU, we're competitive with JVA. Actually, we have some competition outside of volleyball as well. Be mindful of that. There is a much bigger problem than just the sport alone. So I did a little bit more digging. So taking that into consideration, and I want to thank Shelby Brown from Membership Services, who provided me with some data. I pinpoint one particular state. And in one particular state, I looked at one specific region and I wanted to do a deep dive on what the demographic group was for girls under the age of 18. In this particular state, 12% of girls in this state are under the age of 18. I looked at this one region and broke it down by ethnicity. And I saw in this particular state utilizing the Center for Public Policy Priorities, because sometimes the U.S. Census is, where there's a lot of conflicting information. So I tried to zero down. In this state, it showed on that second category the percentage of female under the age of 18. Of the 12% in totality of this particular state, This is the breakdown of females of these different ethnic groups. Then I looked at the region and said, wow, this is really interesting. For an example, if 5% of the 12% females in that specific state are Asians, but we're talking about 0.03% in that region, there potentially could be some opportunities to recruit. Same thing when it comes to the American Indian, Alaska Native. I've noticed even when it comes to dropping down two or more races, those are ethnic minorities that identify both ways. 15% of that 12% in the state exists, but in this particular region, 0.07 are in that particular region. So I'm looking at opportunities to find growth. What are we missing when it comes to diversity? Okay. And I did the same thing on the same point with the boys. If their problem was that we need more boys to be involved, I looked at a totally different region, a totally different state, and I evaluated it in a very similar fashion. In this particular state, also 12% of boys in that state are under the age of 18. I've looked at the U.S. Census and the Center for Health Policy Research of the ethnic group. In that particular state, it's a breakdown of all of those 12% of the boys. There's a breakdown of ethnicity. And then I looked at what are the possibilities. Now, I can't say, here it is, Asian Americans in the state, they're 11%, but in this region, 31% of the boys in this region are Asian. So not only it met the baseline, it exceeded the baseline of boys in that particular region. And so the reason why I'm showing you this is because expanding also is looking outside of the usual suspects, if you will. That is the reason why I asked the question, do you know the profile of your athletes? Know the profile, then find out where the opportunities are to recruit additional athletes. Now, just to let you know what that formula was, it was the total number of athletes or the specific categories of that particular athletes divided, the specific number of ethnic minorities and then divided by the total number of athletes. And then you utilize whatever the baseline is. I use the state. You can say, I'm only going to take 5 cities in my area where I draw into recruitment. You can take the county where you're at, but find the particular baseline. Once you find the baseline, then you can connect with where your target groups county, my city, my state, and that's my recruitment base. I'm going to utilize that. So always establish a baseline to help determine what the opportunities are. Now, of course, when we're creating these particular strategies, we have to think about the diversity, equity, and inclusion is making sure that we provide those, putting people in the room with those different experiences, characteristics, identities. The equity of the how is making sure that we're providing the resources for them to be successful. And the inclusion is the why. How do we make sure that they're involved and engaged so they can have that sense of belonging? But I need to point out that DEI is not about a requirement. This conversation isn't to say that you must go find underrepresented populations. That's not what it's about. It is just to explore opportunities of strategies that we didn't consider. It's not about a head count or a quota. It is not giving people things that they don't deserve, or just because you provide something for one person doesn't mean you're taking something away from anyone. It is about expanding opportunities and expanding strategies and thinking outside the box, just like Billy Bean and Moneyball did. For equity, it's not a quick fix. We're not lowering any type of standards. And of course, it's not the responsibility of the underrepresented group to spearhead it. If we're all going to create a new strategy, we all should be pitching in and lean into. Not trying to find a token. What we're trying to do is be very intentional and expanding these particular opportunities and exploring for new athletes. And when we find them and we're providing them with those opportunities, we want to make sure they're included. Not a one size fit all. It's not just putting them all in the room and say, there you go, you're different. We've checked our box. We want to be intentional, don't want to experiment or test this out. And we definitely don't want to force anyone to do something that they're not comfortable. So that is what DEI is not. It's very important. It is expanding opportunities. So here's our third poll question. Many of us do have some diversity, but the question is, are you leaning into any specific strategies to expand your teams or your organization? So the poll question will come back up if we can go to number 3 of that particular question. And so whether it's recruitment by word of mouth or referral, do you recruit from other sports, which we'll eventually talk about? Do you utilize social media or any kind of print when it comes to tryouts? Or maybe you collaborate with an organization like Starlings or create a Starlings. What are some of those strategies that you've used to recruit underrepresented populations?
I'll give you all a few more seconds in here to provide your responses. So it looks like our top strategies are word of mouth, referral, and social media.
Wonderful. And being mindful when we're considering these particular strategies, showing models and faces definitely help. I'll give you a little bit of it, personal experience. When I was a high school student, I learned about volleyball and I tried out for the team. I was a sophomore, so I had zero volleyball experience. But I was an athlete. I ran track and I made the junior varsity team. Did not last too long on the junior varsity team because, you get punished from time to time. You get grounded, and I missed a couple of practices and I quit. But I tried again my junior year and actually made the team. I saw Flo Hyman and Rita Crockett, who were on the national team. And when I saw women who looked like me, because I didn't come from a diverse high school, when I saw someone who looked like me, I invested. It was the most beautiful thing I ever saw. I'm like, wow, there are there are Black women who play this sport. And I watched them all the time. That's all I was fixated on, was watching Flo Hyman and Rita Crockett. So showing photos and videos and models also makes a significant difference also, and connecting prospective athletes with existing players help as well. So be mindful as you're recruiting in those particular spaces. So we're going to lean a little bit more on when I mentioned earlier about there are some external threats, competitors that we have to be mindful of. But guess what? We have some threats on other sports too. There are some other sports that are recruiting girls, recruiting boys to play to go against our sport. And I wanted to lean into to show you the numbers through the National Federation of High School Associations of all of the sports that girls are playing in the high school level. And the rising sport is flag football and wrestling. We need to know that. We need to make sure that we're mindful of that. It's not other volleyball organizations, it's other sports as well. Now, I came from the NFL, 3 seasons with the Denver Broncos, and the NFL is leaning into flag football through monies, through television, through getting other NFL players. As a matter of fact, it is going to be in LA 28. So there is a big competition of flag football, especially with girls. It was a 77% growth in that since 2018. Girls wrestling and women's wrestling is another threat we have to be mindful of. So when we're thinking about recruiting, we have to find out how we can leverage these type of sports to help us. Our growth isn't as significant as those other 2 sports. So there's some really intense competition out here, and this is not in the club space, this is just in the high school space. So be mindful of that as we're moving forward. In the boys' side, and I do apologize because I kept trying to dig for data over and over again to see what that particular growth, but similar to the girls, the flag football is big on the boys' side. Now, if you see some duplication of the numbers, that was intentional because I couldn't find the growth, the data to show where it grew from 2018 to 2022. But it is still telling that flag football, and then in this particular case, swim and dive is growing. When the Michael Phelps, Ryan Lochte era hit, and it was very, very popular, swimming started growing significantly. On top of it, if you take a look at football, there's a decline within that time frame because there are a significant amount of injuries, concussions, and other major injuries that really, for the most part, took a lot of the boys away from football to explore other sports. They still wanted to compete. They just didn't want to deal with those particular injuries. So when you take those things into consideration, I say let's lean into it. I say lean into this third strategy about let's promote multi-sport participation. Now, I know that that may be kind of difficult because we do want to win. We do want the athletes to focus on our sport, be an elite athlete, and to get us to nationals and win national championships and hopefully Division I scholarships and etc. But we must be mindful that the competition is fierce out there. What we don't want is burnout. Being a former Division I coach myself, I have recruited some elite young ladies to participate in my teams, but I must admit, I have been told on several occasions as a Division I volleyball coach, I was only doing it because it made my parents happy and they put a lot of money on my club experience. But they started burning out. And so you only can do so much. So to lean into multi-sport athletes, talk about some of those transferable skills that they can use. I started as a track athlete. I was a long jumper. I played basketball. I was the leading block shots. I led the team in block shots. And I was an outside attacker, all jumping, lateral movement. I was good in all 3 sports. Never touched club because my family could not afford it, but it helped. So be mindful that we don't want to shun multi-sport athletes away. We can lean into it. And any opportunity to promote the multi-sport athlete, let's do it. Let's explore on what that looks like. The goal is we want to find athletes that fits our club, our culture, and can really contribute. Athletes, not volleyball players, but athletes. And I remember at one point I learned how to play tennis, and my pro said, "Well, if you're a volleyball player, tennis is going to be easy." Because the movements are very similar and I picked it up very fast. So let's lean into that a little bit. So, going to question 4, when I ask you if you know about the profile of your athletes, I'm curious to hear what is the percentage of your athletes that are competing in an organized sport in their school or in the community? I would love to know. What are the percentage?
All right. Well, looks like we're mostly split between 5 to 25% and over 50%. Uh,
Okay,
so somewhere in the 5 to 50%.
5 to 50, that's great. I wanna make sure I put my disclaimer. I'm not saying just go after all athletes, it's like having, all, middle blockers, we don't want all middle blockers. We need we need some diversity on our teams in terms of the specialty. So that's great that we're open. We're open to having these multi sport athletes. One of the things that I used to do, I would notice in our community high school when they had tryouts and when there were players that didn't make the team and they were bummed out, I was, I was working in the high schools too. And I was like, hey, have you ever just thought about you didn't make that basketball team? Are you interested in volleyball? And then just really talk about that. So sometimes they can feel bummed out for not making a specific team, but we have other opportunities as well. But we have to keep in mind it's not just the sports that we're competing with. Our youth have so many competing interests. We're talking about, academic clubs, agriculture, gaming. When I was an athletic director, I had esports. I had esports, and there were a lot of our varsity athletes that wanted to play esports. I remember my esports coach wanted to recruit the football captain. I was like, "Ooh, be careful. Be really, really careful about that." But there were a lot of competing interests, whether our youth want to go into arts and entertainment or a lot of different clubs like the chess club, the drama club, just a lot of different club, and of course the sports. We have to be mindful that our youth today have more information and they are engaged in so many other things that what we want to do is we want to support them and then try to find out how we can utilize those transferable skills or their love or their passion and how it could connect to our sport. And there are a lot of different ways you can do that. But there are some, factors that are going to influence these rates. I had 5 basketball courts within a half a mile radius from my house. I had no volleyball courts. So there are some cultural preferences and traditions that naturally I was going to go around and play basketball. What made it interesting was I learned how to set using a basketball. I didn't have a volleyball. My fingers are so strong because all I did throughout the summer was setting and passing with a basketball. So be mindful of the environments and the socioeconomic factors where our students and our prospective students are coming from, as well as the facilities and resources. They could be great athletes, but maybe they just aren't in the spaces to make it work. And just like I learned how to play volleyball with a basketball, watching Flo Hyman and Rita Crockett on television, and Karch and St. John and Chris Marlowe, they actually came to our high school, the men's national team. And I remember I was a ball shagger. It's things like those experiences really opened my eyes in so many different ways. So role models are so important as well. Any opportunity to show our national team members, your star members on your various teams, the coaches, show the faces as much as you possibly can. And then, of course, any opportunity to support the school or the community. That is so important. So we've leaned into some strategies, but I'm kind of curious, which strategy do you plan to lean in more? We've covered 3 different things. So in looking at question number 5, which ones that you think that you can lean in more? You can vote for more than one strategy that you think you can lean in more on.
Looks like a lot of responses that are popping up are for incorporating technology in the strategies and trying to recruit some more of the underrepresented populations in the sport, as well as exploring how to engage the athletes from other sports.
Love it. And there's not one wrong or right answer in these particular strategies. But our goal is just like Billy Bean, we got to think outside. We have to figure out how to stay ahead of the changing generations and demographics. How do we expand our strategies? How do we make sure that we're tapping into all of the different types of demographic groups? And then how do we leverage some new and innovative technological ways to speak to our prospective athletes, our coaches, anything to make sure that we are working on the side of the people who we want to engage? It kind of reminds me of a strategy called the game theory. And the game theory is typically used in business where you have to think ahead and you have to think about what the other side is doing before you make a decision. No difference when you're on one side of the net or the next, whether it's a setter coming from the back row or there at the front row, is how do you strategize if the setter is going to dump, gonna run that first tempo attack or fly it out to the outside attacker. It is all about strategy. And so in this particular session, we talked about the 3 different strategies to take in consideration, but please don't forget the data and the analytics like Billy Bean used can be to your advantage. So we're going to go into our final question, which is to evaluate the session. I would love to hear or to learn, how did you feel about this session on a scale of 1 to 4, 4 being excellent? I would love to see how you rate the session, and then we can open up to any questions.
Perfect. Thank you, China. So I'll start you with a question and just a quick reminder that if you have questions, feel free to put them into the chat or the Q&A. So China, this question came up a few times as we were going through the presentation. But if you think about engaging underrepresented populations within the sport, some of the coaches expressed maybe a concern when 2 parents were working and getting the athletes to practice facilities. Do you have any ideas to offer folks about ways you might be able to identify and work within the obstacles you might have with some of those underrepresented populations?
Yeah, so of course we already know about carpooling. However, When it comes to transportation, many of these populations may or may not, depending on the social economic level, may already have that familiarity with the public transportation. So, any opportunity for you to lean into public transportation knowledge, the buses, the trains, that is very important because not everyone has reliable transportation. And so, if you're not able to start a carpool or a shared ride strategy, public transportation is very, very important. I have worked in a Starlings environment in Baltimore, and many of our student athletes utilize public transportation. So I had to be knowledgeable myself to make sure that they're at the bus stop. They're comfortable with making any transfers. Do they have the fare money or the little card that they use? So lean into that a little bit more.
Perfect. Another question that popped up that I think is a particularly good one, is when you think about the charts you put up of the region examples, demographics within the state. One of the things that we run into, maybe with men's volleyball compared to women's volleyball, is how present it is within certain states. Do you have any recommendations on how coaches could advocate for policies that either helped move volleyball seasons around or maybe got the sport within the NFHS officially in their state? Kind of thinking about that policy level that would increase access.
So are you referring to switching seasons?
Yes.
Ooh, yeah, that's a big one. That is definitely a big one. I've been in some states where seasons have switched, not specifically in volleyball, for soccer, for an example, because I do have a soccer background as well. That's where the engaging in lobbying, and I don't want to use the word lobbying as a negative, but really having conversations with school board members. But what I would recommend first is leaning into the state high school associations because although that it focuses on that particular conference, everything is going to be based upon state championships. And so, starting small, or you can start from the top down, is to find out the rationale. And many times it could be based upon facility limitations. It could be based upon, support staff. There's so many more reasons why there are some particular challenge. It could be of weather. Weather could be a problem. So I think that to learn the ins and outs and the rationale why they're having certain seasons during certain times is a very first start. Remember, assess the problem first. What is the true problem? And if the true problem is a much bigger picture from a statewide perspective versus just specifically in the conference of that school or the city, then that's going to totally, change the game for you to leverage. But to know who the policymakers are as well is very, very important. But sometimes tradition is hard. People are just so used to doing the same thing. And just like in the case of Billy Bean, he's like, we're not going to do it that way. We have to change. But finding the right leaders who are going to advocate for those changes are going to make a significant difference.